My grandfather died last year, sometime when my son was maybe a year old. We had dinner with the whole family every Friday night, so my son had seen him several times. My grandfather was a very quiet, proud man, but when he thought he was alone or unseen, he would make silly faces at my son to get a laugh. A couple of nights after his funeral, my son, who liked to crawl into bed with us in the middle of the night, started laughing uncontrollably at around 2 a.m. I woke up, disoriented, and got out of bed to see what was going on. I found my son sitting in the middle of the living room, in the dark, laughing. I asked, "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" In his toddler speak, he said, "Papa funny." A chill ran down my spine. I felt uneasy, but I tried to stay calm. I went to pick him up and bring him to our room for the rest of the night. As I was carrying him away, he said, "Bye Papa," and blew a kiss at absolutely nothing I could see. The air felt colder all of a sudden. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about what had happened. It was unsettling. There was a hunter in the woods. After a long day of hunting, he found himself lost in the middle of an immense forest. The sun was setting, and he felt the weight of fatigue and growing apprehension. He decided to head in one direction, hoping it would lead him out of the increasingly oppressive foliage. As the hours dragged on, the forest seemed to close in around him. Every rustle and snap of a twig echoed ominously in the twilight. Just as he began to despair, he stumbled upon a small clearing. In the middle stood a solitary cabin. Relief washed over him as he realized how dark it had grown. Desperate for shelter, he approached the cabin and noticed the door was slightly ajar. Cautiously, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The cabin was empty. No signs of recent habitation. Feeling a mix of unease and exhaustion, the hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he scanned the room, he was struck by the numerous portraits that adorned the walls. Each one painted with incredible detail. The eyes of the figures in the portraits seemed to follow him. Their faces contorted with expressions of intense hatred. A chill ran down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Determined to ignore the hateful gazes, he turned his back to the portraits, facing the wall. His mind, heavy with the events of the day and the unsettling presence of the portraits, eventually surrendered to a restless sleep. Morning came abruptly. Sunlight flooded the small room. The hunter blinked, his eyes adjusting to the unexpected brightness. As he sat up, he looked around in confusion. The portraits were gone. In their place were windows. Windows that looked out into the surrounding forest. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth. The faces he had seen the night before. They weren't paintings. They had been watching him all along. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it a year or so ago. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening, a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late, and the buses stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus the next morning. Minji was very reluctant. Inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea. But he was begging her. Eventually, she relented. They went back to her one-room apartment. She got into the bed, while he laid a blanket out on the floor. They both fell asleep. A few hours later, at maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says, "let's go get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now? It's 2 a.m. Go back to bed." But the student insists. "No, I'm so hungry. Let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen. He can fix himself some. This doesn't satisfy him, he doesn't want ramen. There's a 24-hour place just down the road. Let's go there. Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out. As soon as they're on the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." Minji's heart raced. They quickly called the police. As they waited, they stayed outside, too scared to go back in. The police arrived shortly and Minji and the boy explained the situation. The officers entered the apartment cautiously. Minutes felt like hours. Then, the police emerged with a disheveled man in handcuffs. It turned out he was a homeless man. He had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under her bed, for over 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on her floor. He had a clear view under the bed. The police took the man away. Minji was in shock. She kept thinking about all the nights she had spent in that apartment, unaware that someone was just a few feet away. She couldn't comprehend how he had managed to stay hidden for so long. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were sleeping together when I woke up to her saying, "What are you doing?" She sometimes talks in her sleep, but this sounded so coherent and urgent that it jolted me awake. I asked her what she was talking about. She then woke up and said she thought she saw someone at the end of the bed. We brushed it off, thinking it was just a dream or a semi-awake hallucination. We tried to settle back down and go to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up again. This time, I saw someone standing on the bed, with the sheets wrapped up and twisted around their neck. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "What are you doing?" Just then, my girlfriend woke me up for real. She said she had been dreaming the exact same thing, and had also said the exact same thing, "What are you doing?" We both sat up in bed, trying to process what had just happened. The coincidences felt too strange to ignore. We talked about it for a while, trying to find a rational explanation. But there was no clear answer. It was one of those moments that left us both feeling unsettled, wondering how two people could have the same vivid, disturbing dream at the exact same time. Or it was just a dream, or if something more unsettling was happening. A few years ago, my brother started getting a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every night. He would answer. And it was this hellish noise, like static mixed with screams. At first, he tried to ignore it, but the calls kept coming every single night. The noise was so disturbing it would keep him up for hours, shaking. After a month of this, he decided he couldn't take it anymore. He changed his cell number, hoping that would put an end to the nightmare. For a week or so, there was blessed silence. Then it began again. The exact same noise. The exact same time. Desperation set in. He finally decided to backdial the call. The line connected to an old man who sounded confused and had no clue what my brother was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, the phone would ring a few more times. No messages were ever left. One night, feeling completely helpless, he recorded the sound and played it back for me. It was worse than he described. An eerie, hellish mix of static and faint screams. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Frustrated and scared, he decided to take more drastic measures. He ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and got yet another new number. We hoped this would finally put an end to the calls. But you guessed it. The screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every night. His nerves were frayed. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every little noise. He back-dialed the number again, and this time, it connected to a different person. They had no idea what he was talking about. Around this time, things started to get worse. He lost his job due to lack of sleep and constant stress. He had to give up his phone because he couldn't afford the bills anymore. The calls stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. For a while, things seemed to calm down. We all thought maybe the nightmare was finally over. Then one day, our mom asked me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother and he was beside himself. He back-dialed the number from our home phone. This time, the number was disconnected. The calls never came again after that.